The Great Hall of the Galaxy Council was bigger than most cities and filled with creatures that looked like nightmares to human eyes. 47 different alien species sat in their special chairs that floated above the polished metal floor. Some had too many arms. Others had no arms at all. Some breathed gas that would kill humans in seconds, while others needed the cold of deep space to survive. But they all had one thing in common today. They wanted to make humans bow down to them. Ambassador Hyunwoo stood at the human speaking area and looked around the massive room. He was a tall man with black hair that was going gray at the sides, and dark eyes that missed nothing. Next to him stood Admiral Sora, a woman who had fought in 3 wars and still carried the scars on her hands from the last one. Her uniform was perfectly clean, and her back was straight as a steel rod. Behind them sat the rest of the human team, 12 people who represented all of humanity in the galaxy. The aliens had been talking for hours about what they wanted from humans. They spoke in their strange languages that sounded like metal, scraping against stone, or wind, howling through broken glass. The translation machines turned their words into human speech, but they could not translate the hate and greed in their voices. Chancellor Keth was the leader of the Galaxy Council, and he was not happy. He belonged to a species called the hegemony, and they looked like giant lizards that walked on 2 legs. His skin was dark green with yellow spots, and he had 4 arms that moved like snakes when he talked. His species had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years before humans came along and started changing everything. "Listen well, humans," Chancellor Keth said, his voice coming through the speakers like the sound of rocks falling down a mountain. "We have been very patient with your kind, but our patience has limits. You came to our galaxy only 300 years ago, and already you think you can do whatever you want." Hyunwoo did not move or speak. He had learned long ago that aliens talked a lot when they were nervous. The more they talked, the more they showed their fear. "Your species has caused too much trouble," the Chancellor continued. "You build things too fast, you think too much, and you ask too many questions. Other species listen to us because we are older and wiser. But humans always want to do things their own way." Admiral Sora kept her face blank, but her eyes were watching every alien in the room. She had studied their military forces for 20 years and knew exactly how many ships they had and where they kept them. The numbers were not good for humans, but numbers did not tell the whole story. Director Jin Ho sat in the back row and pretended to read his tablet. But he was actually listening to conversations happening all around the room through tiny devices his people had placed months ago. The aliens thought humans were too simple to spy on them properly. They were wrong about many things. "We have decided to give you one last chance," Chancellor Keth announced, spreading all 4 arms wide. "Accept our terms, and you can continue to exist in our galaxy. Refuse, and face the consequences." The terms were written on a crystal tablet that floated over to the human area. Hyunwoo picked it up and read the alien writing that appeared in human letters thanks to the translator. Each line made his jaw tighter, but his face stayed calm. The aliens wanted humans to give up all their faster-than-light travel technology. They wanted humans to stop expanding to new worlds and stay only on the planets they already had. They wanted humans to pay tribute every year in the form of rare metals and energy crystals. They wanted humans to share all their scientific discoveries but get nothing in return. Most importantly, they wanted humans to obey without question whenever the Council gave orders. "These terms are interesting," Hyunwoo said finally, setting the tablet down gently. "But I think there has been a misunderstanding." The alien voices grew quiet. This was not the response they expected. "You seem to think that humans need the Galaxy Council," Hyunwoo continued in his calm voice. "You think we came here because we were lost or afraid. You think we stayed because we needed your permission." Captain Minsu stepped forward from the human group. He was an older man whose face showed the marks of many battles. His left hand was missing 2 fingers from a fight with pirates, and his right arm had scars from shoulder to wrist. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but every alien in the room heard him clearly. "We came to this galaxy because it was here," Minsu said. "We stayed because we liked it. We helped other species because we thought it was the right thing to do, but we never needed your permission for any of it." The insect-like Vex started clicking their mandibles in anger. The crystal creatures called Karathi began humming in frequencies that hurt human ears. The gas-breathing Nethys released clouds of blue vapor that meant they were extremely upset. "You dare to threaten the Galaxy Council?" demanded Ambassador Vorth of the Vex. She looked like a giant mantis with too many eyes and arms that ended in sharp claws. "No species has ever refused our generous offer of membership." "We are not refusing membership," Hyunwoo replied. "We are refusing slavery." The word hit the aliens like a physical blow. In all their thousands of years of ruling the galaxy, no one had ever called their system by its real name. They preferred terms like guidance and coordination and mutual benefit. But humans had a way of using simple words that cut through lies like knives. Admiral Sora took a step forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. When she spoke, her voice was like ice forming on metal. "The Human Federation has considered your proposal carefully," she said. "Our answer is no." The silence that followed was complete. Even the machines stopped humming. 47 species stared at 12 humans who had just done something that had never been done before in the history of the galaxy. Chancellor Keth's yellow eyes grew wide with shock and then narrow with rage. "You cannot simply refuse," he hissed. "The Galaxy Council decides who travels between the stars. We control the trade routes. We command the largest fleets. Without us, you will be alone in the dark." Hyunwoo picked up his papers and put them in his case. The other humans began gathering their things as well. Director Jin-ho quietly activated a small device that would destroy all the listening devices his people had placed in the alien ships. "Then we will be alone," Hyunwoo said simply. The humans walked toward the exit as chaos erupted behind them. Alien voices shouted threats and promises and pleas all at the same time. Some demanded that the humans be arrested immediately. Others suggested that perhaps the terms could be discussed further. A few even offered to negotiate completely new agreements. But the humans did not stop walking. They had made their choice. As they reached the door, Chancellor Keth's voice rose above all the others. "This is your final warning, humans. Accept our terms or be cut off from galactic civilization forever." Hyunwoo paused at the doorway and looked back one last time. "Forever is a very long time, Chancellor. We will see who gets tired of it first." Then, the humans were gone, leaving behind 47 species who had never imagined that anyone would choose exile over submission. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. 6 months had passed since the humans walked out of the Galaxy Council chambers, and the aliens were beginning to understand what silence really meant. Dr. Yoonjung stood in her laboratory on New Sol, a human colony world at the edge of known space, and watched the communication screens that showed nothing but static. Every day brought dozens of messages from alien governments, but every message went unanswered. The laboratory was filled with machines that could cure diseases the aliens had fought for centuries. In the corner sat a medical scanner that could detect cancer in any known species weeks before their own doctors would find it. On the wall hung charts showing genetic treatments that had saved millions of alien lives over the past 50 years. But now those machines sat silent and unused, while alien worlds suffered. Dr. Yoonjung had spent 20 years working with alien doctors to fight plagues and genetic disorders. She knew the names of colleagues on 40 different worlds who had become friends over decades of shared research. Some of them had sent personal messages begging for help with new outbreaks of old diseases. She read every message but sent no replies. The silence was not just about medicine. On military bases across human space, Admiral Sora was implementing what humans called Protocol 7, complete communication blackout with all alien species. Every human ship, station, and colony had orders to ignore all contact attempts from non-human sources. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy while remaining perfectly visible to themselves. Commander Tae-hyun led the withdrawal of human peacekeeping forces from the border regions where different alien species had been fighting for thousands of years. His ships moved like ghosts through space, using technology the aliens could not detect or understand. One day, the human patrols were there, keeping the peace between ancient enemies. The next day, they were gone, and the shooting started again. The aliens had grown used to human ships appearing whenever trouble started. For 50 years, human commanders had stepped between warring fleets and somehow convinced them to stop fighting. Human negotiators had solved border disputes that had lasted longer than some species had existed. Human engineers had built neutral zones and monitoring stations that kept old enemies from killing each other. Now all of that was gone, and the aliens were remembering why they had been fighting in the first place. Researcher Eugene worked in a secret facility deep underground on Earth, compiling reports from across human space. Every human colony, research station, and military outpost had gone completely dark to alien observation. The humans had not left the galaxy or hidden in some distant corner. They were still there, still building, still exploring, still growing, stronger. But to alien eyes and ears, they had become invisible. The technology that made this possible was something the aliens had never suspected humans possessed. Quantum encrypted communication networks that connected every human settlement instantly across any distance. Stealth systems that made human ships undetectable to alien sensors. Manufacturing processes that worked without leaving any trace that aliens could follow. The Galaxy Council had assumed that humans were just another young species with a few clever tricks. They had never bothered to study human technology seriously, because they thought they already knew everything worth knowing. This was their first mistake of many. Captain Sungmin received intelligence reports from deep-cover human agents who had been placed throughout alien society years before anyone expected trouble. These agents looked like normal humans, but carried genetic modifications that let them survive in alien environments. Some worked as translators and trade representatives. Others served as technical advisors and cultural liaisons. All of them continued their jobs as if nothing had changed while secretly reporting everything they saw and heard. The reports painted a picture of growing panic among alien governments. The Vex Confederacy was dealing with a food shortage because their agricultural systems had been designed by human botanists. The Karathi Empire was facing industrial breakdowns because their manufacturing equipment required maintenance techniques that only humans understood. The hegemony was struggling with transportation problems because their cargo ships used navigation systems based on human mathematics. For decades, the aliens had been happy to let humans handle the technical details of running galactic civilization. Human engineers built the power plants that supplied energy to alien cities. Human doctors developed the medicines that kept alien populations healthy. Human teachers designed the educational systems that trained alien scientists and engineers. The aliens had thought they were using human knowledge to make their own civilizations stronger. They never realized they were becoming completely dependent on human expertise for everything that mattered. Dr. Hana ran the Human Xenobiology Institute, and her job was to study how different alien species lived and what they needed to survive. Her files contained detailed information about the biology, psychology, and sociology of every major species in the galaxy. She knew which species were prone to genetic disorders, which ones had unstable government systems, and which ones were likely to start wars when they got scared. Now she was watching all of her predictions come true at once. The Centauri colonies were experiencing plague outbreaks because their medical systems had been maintained by human technicians. The Altarian Federation was facing civil unrest because their economic models had been designed by human economists. The Draconis Empire was struggling with equipment failures because their military hardware used human-designed components. Each crisis was something that human experts could solve easily. The medical knowledge existed to stop the plagues. The economic theories were available to stabilize the markets. The technical manuals were written to fix the broken equipment. But all of that knowledge was now locked away behind the wall of human silence. Engineer Seok Jin oversaw the dismantling of joint infrastructure projects that had connected human and alien space. Massive orbital stations that had been built with human engineering began failing without proper maintenance. Jump gates that allowed faster-than-light travel started showing stress fractures because alien technicians did not understand the underlying physics. Communication relays that had carried messages between distant worlds went offline one by one as their human-designed systems exceeded their operational limits. The aliens had never bothered to learn how these systems actually worked. They had been content to operate the controls and leave the real understanding to human specialists. Now those specialists were gone, and the aliens were discovering that pressing buttons was not the same as comprehending principles. The Galactic Council tried to maintain order, but their authority was crumbling along with everything else. Species that had cooperated for centuries began blaming each other for the catastrophic decision to threaten humanity. Trade agreements fell apart as trust evaporated. Military alliances dissolved as each species hoarded resources for their own survival. Chancellor Keth called emergency session after emergency session, but every meeting ended in arguments and accusations. The Vex claimed that the Karathi had sabotaged the negotiations with humans. The Karathi accused the hegemony of being too proud to admit their mistake. The smaller species demanded that someone fix the problems before their worlds collapsed completely. But no one knew how to fix anything because the solutions all required human knowledge that was no longer available. Some alien leaders suggested sending military forces to human space to demand that the crisis be resolved immediately. Admiral Sora had anticipated this possibility, and her response was swift and devastating. Human ships appeared just long enough to destroy 3 alien scout fleets that had approached human territory. The attacks were precise and overwhelming, leaving no survivors to report what weapons had been used or how the humans had detected them so easily. The message was clear. Human space was now forbidden territory, and any alien ship that entered would be destroyed without warning. Other aliens tried a different approach and sent diplomatic missions carrying gifts and apologies. These ships were allowed to approach human colonies, but their communications were ignored completely. The humans would watch alien ambassadors broadcast their messages into empty space for hours before the alien ships finally gave up and left. The silence was absolute and unbreakable. As the first year of isolation began, the aliens finally started to understand what they had lost when they tried to make humans into slaves. They had not just lost a single species. They had lost the foundation that held their entire civilization together. 1 year into humanity's silence, the galaxy was falling apart faster than anyone had thought possible. The Vex swarm had been quiet for decades, held in check by human patrol fleets that made expansion too costly to attempt. Now those patrols were gone, and the insect-like aliens were spreading across disputed territories like a plague of locusts. Their bioships consumed everything organic they encountered, turning entire ecosystems into fuel for their endless reproduction. Captain Sungmin watched the intelligence reports flow in from his hidden observation post near the edge of Vex space. The swarm had taken 12 worlds in the past 6 months and showed no signs of slowing down. Each conquered planet became a breeding ground for millions of new Vex warriors. The other alien species were too busy dealing with their own crises to mount any effective resistance. The Karathi and Zephyrian empires had resumed their ancient blood feud with a violence that shocked even the war-hardened humans. These two species had been fighting over the same star systems for 3,000 years before humans arrived and convinced them to sign peace treaties. Now those treaties were forgotten, and both sides were using weapons that had been banned by galactic law for centuries. Dr. Hanna reviewed the casualty reports from her secure facility on Mars. The Karathi had used plasma bombs to sterilize 3 Zephyrian colonies, killing 40 million civilians in a matter of hours. The Zephyrians had responded by releasing engineered viruses that turned Karathi cities into graveyards. Both species were now mobilizing their entire populations for total war. Before the silence began, human peacekeepers would have intervened within days. Human negotiators would have forced both sides to remember why the peace treaties existed in the first place. Human military forces would have enforced ceasefires until cooler heads could prevail. Now there was no one to stop the killing, and both empires seemed determined to fight until one or both were extinct. The breakdown of law and order was not limited to the major powers. Crime syndicates that had been kept under control by human law enforcement agencies were now operating with complete impunity. The Void Pirates had seized control of 6 major trade routes and were demanding tribute from any ship that wanted to pass through safely. The shadow cartels had taken over the drug trade on dozens of worlds, selling substances that caused madness and death among species that had no natural resistance. Engineer Seok Jin monitored the failure of critical infrastructure across alien space. The great orbital cities that housed billions of aliens were losing power as their fusion reactors broke down. The reactors had been designed by human engineers using principles that alien scientists did not understand. When the reactors needed maintenance or repair, the aliens discovered that pressing the emergency shutdown button was the limit of their knowledge. On the world of New Centauri, 8 billion aliens were facing starvation as their orbital farms went offline. The farms used hydroponic systems that had been perfected by human agricultural specialists. Without those specialists to maintain the delicate balance of nutrients and environmental controls, the crops were dying and could not be replaced. The Altarian Federation was dealing with economic collapse as their currency became worthless overnight. Their monetary system had been stabilized by human economists who understood complex market dynamics that were beyond alien comprehension. Without that understanding, panic selling and hoarding had destroyed the value of their credits and reduced their civilization to primitive barter systems. Even basic transportation was breaking down as the Nexus gates began failing one by one. These massive structures allowed ships to jump instantly between star systems, making interstellar travel practical for species that did not have advanced faster-than-light technology. But the gates required constant adjustments to maintain their quantum field alignments. Adjustments that only human physicists knew how to calculate. The first gate failure occurred in the Rigel system, cutting off communication and trade with 17 colony worlds. Within days, 3 more gates went offline in different sectors of the galaxy. The aliens tried desperately to repair them using their own technicians, but their attempts only made the damage worse. Ships that tried to use malfunctioning gates were destroyed or lost in hyperspace, never to be seen again. Scientist Wu Jin compiled reports on the cascading failures that were destroying alien civilization piece by piece. Medical systems were collapsing, leading to pandemic outbreaks of diseases that had been eradicated decades ago. Manufacturing plants were shutting down as their automated systems exceeded their operational limits without proper maintenance. Communication networks were failing as relay stations lost power or suffered critical malfunctions. The aliens had built their modern civilization on top of human innovations without understanding how those innovations actually worked. They had been content to use human-designed technology like magic tools that would work forever without explanation. Now they were learning the difference between using something and understanding it. Intelligence Director Jin Ho received the most disturbing reports from human agents embedded deep within alien governments. Several species were facing extinction-level crises that could be easily solved with human intervention. The Crystalline Collective was suffering from a plague that was slowly turning their silicon-based bodies into inert glass. The cure existed in human medical databases, but those databases were now locked away behind the wall of silence. The Aquatic Consortium was watching their oceans die as pollution accumulated beyond the ability of their ecosystems to process. Human environmental engineers had designed filtration systems that could clean their waters in a matter of months, but those engineers were no longer available to implement the solutions. Some alien leaders had begun sending personal messages directly to human colonies, begging for help and offering anything humans might want in exchange. They promised to abandon the old Galaxy Council completely and accept any terms humans chose to impose. They offered tribute, territory, and total submission if only the silence would end. But the humans did not respond to desperate pleas any more than they had responded to arrogant demands. The communication blackout remained absolute and unbreakable. The psychological impact on alien populations was becoming as serious as the physical crises. For thousands of years, most alien species had lived with the certainty that their governments knew how to solve any problem that might arise. That certainty was now gone, and panic was spreading through their societies like wildfire. Riots broke out on major alien worlds as citizens demanded that their leaders fix the growing list of problems. Governments that had ruled for centuries were overthrown by revolutionary movements that promised to find new solutions. But the new leaders quickly discovered that the problems were beyond their ability to solve and were themselves replaced by even more desperate groups. Chancellor. Keth's regime had fallen 6 months earlier when the hegemony's economy crashed completely. Their replacement government had authorized peace overtures toward human space, but found only silence in response. The new chancellor had then tried threats, promises, and bribes, all with the same result. Human space remained as unreachable as the far side of a black hole. The Galaxy Council still existed in name but had no real authority left. Most species had withdrawn their representatives to deal with crises at home. Those that remained spent their time arguing about who was to blame for the catastrophe rather than trying to find solutions. Some aliens suggested that perhaps the time had come to simply wait for humans to die out naturally. But human colonies were thriving in isolation, expanding to new worlds and building new technologies at a pace that seemed to accelerate every month. If anything, separation from alien civilization appeared to be making humans stronger rather than weaker. As the second year of silence began, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The aliens had not been the senior partners in galactic civilization. They had been the junior partners, dependent on human knowledge and innovation for everything that made their modern life possible. Without humans, they were returning to the primitive states they had occupied before first contact. The galaxy was learning a lesson that would reshape the future of interstellar relations. True power did not come from having the largest fleets or controlling the most worlds. True power came from being too valuable to lose, and the aliens had just lost the most valuable thing in the galaxy. 3 years had passed since humans disappeared into silence, and the galaxy looked like a graveyard of broken dreams. Ambassador Hyunwoo stood in the observation deck of a human stealth ship positioned at the edge of what used to be hegemony, space, watching massive alien warships drift powerless through the void. These were vessels that had once terrorized entire star systems, but now they could not even maintain orbit around their home worlds because their navigation systems had failed beyond repair. The aliens had tried everything to re-establish contact with humanity and failed at every attempt. They had built massive communication arrays that broadcast apologies and pleas across all frequencies toward human space. The signals went out every day, and every day there was no response. They had sent gift ships loaded with rare metals, ancient artifacts, and prisoners from their own species as offerings to appease human anger. The ships were allowed to approach human colonies, but were ignored completely, their crews forced to return home with their gifts rejected. Some alien governments had even tried to surrender unconditionally, sending messages that declared their complete submission to human authority and begged for the chance to negotiate new relationships. These messages joined all the others in the vast silence that had become humanity's only response to the outside galaxy. Fleet Admiral Sora reviewed tactical reports from monitoring stations that tracked alien military movements throughout known space. The mighty fleets that had once patrolled trade routes and enforced galactic law were now shadows of their former strength. Without human-designed coordination systems, alien battle groups could not maintain formation during combat operations. Their ships collided with each other during simple maneuvers, and their weapon systems fired at random targets when stressed beyond their design limits. The Karathi war fleets, once considered the most formidable military force in the galaxy, had suffered a series of humiliating defeats against poorly equipped pirate gangs. Their massive dreadnoughts were nearly invulnerable to enemy fire, but they could not hit anything smaller than a space station because their targeting computers required constant recalibration that only human technicians knew how to perform. The Vex Swarm had expanded their territory by 50%, not through military conquest, but by simply moving into systems that other species could no longer defend. Their bioships were primitive compared to the technology used by major powers, but they were also self-repairing and did not depend on complex maintenance procedures that aliens had forgotten how to perform. Dr. Yoon Jung watched reports of medical disasters unfold across alien space from her laboratory on New Sol. Plagues that had been eradicated for generations were returning as alien medical systems collapsed. The Centauri fever had killed 12 million Altarians in the past year because their hospitals no longer had access to the antiviral drugs that human biochemists had developed. The red rot was spreading through Karathi populations because their doctors did not understand the genetic therapy techniques that could stop the disease. The irony was devastating and deliberate. Human medical databases contained cures for every disease that was killing aliens across the galaxy. The knowledge existed, the treatments were known, and the manufacturing processes were documented in detail. But all of that information was locked away behind encryption that alien scientists could not break and protected by security systems. They could not bypass. Captain Min-Su observed the breakdown of interstellar commerce as trade networks that had operated for thousands of years simply ceased to function. The standardized currency system that had allowed different species to trade with each other was based on economic models that human mathematicians had created. Without those humans to maintain the complex calculations that kept exchange rates stable, the currency had become worthless, and trade had reverted to primitive barter systems. Merchant ships that had once carried goods between hundreds of worlds now sat in orbital shipyards because their owners could not afford fuel or maintenance. The great trading companies that had built fortunes over centuries were declaring bankruptcy as their assets became impossible to transport or sell. Entire planets that had specialized in producing specific goods for export were facing economic collapse as demand disappeared. The situation was made worse by the failure of the Nexus Gate network. 27 gates had gone offline in the past year, cutting off entire sectors of the galaxy from each other. The remaining gates were operating far beyond their safe limits and suffering critical failures on a regular basis. Ships that attempted to use damaged gates faced a 50% chance of being destroyed or lost in hyperspace. Alien engineers had tried desperately to repair the failing gates using their own knowledge, but their efforts only accelerated the breakdown. The quantum field calculations required to align gate matrices were beyond their mathematical capabilities. The exotic matter that powered the gates could only be manufactured using processes that human physicists had developed. Even the basic maintenance procedures required tools that were designed and built by human industries. Scientist Wu Jin documented the complete collapse of scientific research across alien civilizations. Universities that had operated for millennia were closing their doors as funding disappeared and equipment broke down beyond repair. Research projects that had been underway for decades were abandoned when alien scientists realized they could not interpret data without human analytical software. The pharmaceutical industry had stopped developing new medicines because drug design required computer modeling systems that only humans understood. The aerospace industry could no longer build new ships because their manufacturing processes depended on metallurgy techniques that human engineers had perfected. Even basic agriculture was failing as crop yields declined without the genetic modifications that human botanists had introduced. Intelligence reports from human agents revealed the true depth of alien desperation. 17 different species had formally requested permission to relocate their entire populations to human space as refugees. They were willing to abandon their homeworlds and accept whatever conditions humans chose to impose in exchange for access to working technology and medical care. 23 governments had fallen to revolution or invasion as their populations, lost faith in leaders who could not solve the growing list of crises. The new regimes were no more capable than their predecessors, but desperate people needed someone to blame for their suffering. In many cases, the revolutionaries were themselves overthrown within months by even more radical groups that promised even more impossible solutions. The Galactic Council had formally disbanded after its last meeting ended in violence. The representatives of different species had attacked each other physically when arguments about responsibility for the crisis turned into accusations of sabotage and betrayal. The Great Chamber, where galactic law had been written for thousands of years, was now empty and dark, its power systems having failed like everything else. Some alien leaders had begun to suggest that perhaps the only solution was to attempt a military invasion of human space. These proposals were quickly abandoned when intelligence assessments revealed the true state of human defenses. Reconnaissance missions that managed to survive encounters with human patrol ships reported weapons technology that was decades ahead of anything aliens possessed. Human warships appeared to be built using manufacturing techniques that produced stronger materials and more efficient power systems than alien science could explain. More disturbing were reports that human civilization was not just surviving in isolation but actually thriving and expanding at an accelerated pace. New human colonies were being established on worlds that had been considered uninhabitable by alien standards. Human ships were exploring regions of space that had been declared too dangerous for normal travel. Human technology was advancing so rapidly that equipment observed 6 months ago was already obsolete. The aliens had assumed that cutting humans off from galactic civilization would weaken them and force them to return as supplicants begging for readmission. Instead, isolation seemed to have freed humans from some invisible constraint that had been holding them back. without the need to accommodate alien limitations or explain their innovations to species that could not understand them. Human science and engineering were advancing at a rate that seemed almost magical. Dr. Hana compiled the final assessment that would determine humanity's next move. The alien threat to human independence had been neutralized completely. Most alien species were now too busy trying to survive to pose any danger to human interests. Those that were still capable of military action were too afraid of human retaliation to risk another confrontation. The time had come for humanity to decide what kind of galaxy they wanted to live in and what role, if any, alien species would be allowed to play in the future. The humans had proven their point beyond any doubt. Now they would have to decide whether mercy was as powerful a weapon as silence had been. 3 years of isolation had transformed the galaxy from a place where aliens ruled and humans served into a graveyard where aliens begged and humans decided who would live and who would die. 5 years after humans walked away from the Galaxy Council, they finally broke their silence, but not in any way the aliens had expected or hoped for. Admiral Sora's fleet materialized at the edge of what had once been the heart of galactic civilization, but the ships that emerged from stealth were unlike anything that had existed when the silence began. They were sleek and beautiful in ways that hurt alien eyes to look at directly, built with technologies that seemed to bend the laws of physics and powered by energy sources that registered as small stars on alien sensors. The human fleet moved through space with a grace that was impossible according to alien understanding of how starships should behave. They changed direction without visible propulsion, accelerated without apparent limits, and communicated with each other using methods that left no trace on any frequency that alien equipment could detect. These were not the crude vessels that had once patrolled galactic trade routes alongside alien warships. These were something entirely new and far beyond anything aliens had imagined was possible. Ambassador Hyunwoo stood once again in a great chamber, but this time it was aboard his own flagship, rather than in the ruins of alien architecture. The HFY chamber was filled with holographic images that showed the current state of every major alien civilization in real time. Most of what he saw was devastation beyond repair, but some species had managed to survive the collapse and were now ready to listen to what humans had to say. The message that went out to all remaining alien governments was simple and clear. Humanity was returning to galactic civilization, but not as participants in the old system. They were returning as the builders of a new system that would operate according to human principles and human values. Any species that wanted to join this new order would be welcome, but only on human terms. The terms were explained in detail to ensure there could be no misunderstanding. Any species that wanted to join the human cooperative would be required to abandon all forms of authoritarian government and adopt democratic systems based on human models. They would be required to share all scientific knowledge and technological capabilities with human oversight. They would be required to accept human advisors in all areas of government, industry, and military affairs. In exchange for these requirements, joining species would receive access to technologies that made their old innovations look like stone tools. Dr. Yun Jung demonstrated medical advances that could not only cure every known disease, but actually reverse the aging process and extend lifespans indefinitely. The cellular repair systems she revealed could regenerate lost limbs, restore damaged organs, and even bring back the recently dead under certain conditions. Engineer Seok Jin unveiled manufacturing technologies that could convert raw matter into any desired product at the molecular level. The matter compilers he demonstrated could turn asteroid rock into food, starship hulls, or complex computer systems with equal ease. Scarcity of material resources would become a concept from the past for any species with access to these devices. Captain Minsu presented defensive technologies that made traditional warfare not just obsolete, but literally impossible. The shield systems he revealed could protect entire planets from any conceivable attack, while the monitoring networks could detect hostile intent before it became hostile action. Peace would be enforced not through threat of retaliation, but through the inability of anyone to successfully commit aggression. The demonstrations were carefully chosen to show aliens exactly what they had lost when they tried to make humans into servants. Every technology revealed was something that could have been shared freely if the Galaxy Council had approached humanity as equals rather than as subjects to be dominated. The message was clear. Cooperation would be rewarded beyond imagination. but only after submission was complete and genuine. The response from alien governments was swift and desperate. The proud hegemony, which had once demanded tribute from humans, was the first to formally request admission to the human cooperative. Their new chancellor prostrated himself before human representatives and begged for the chance to prove his species' worthiness to serve under human guidance. The warrior Karathi, who had spent 3,000 years conquering weaker species, sent their entire remaining fleet to human space as a gesture of surrender. Their ships were old and damaged, barely functional after years of fighting without proper maintenance, but they offered them freely along with the unconditional service of every Karathi warrior still alive. The insectoid Vex, whose swarms had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, offered to submit their entire species to human genetic modification programs that would eliminate their aggressive tendencies permanently. They were willing to become something completely different from what they had been, if that was the price of survival in the new order. Even the minor species that had barely been noticed during the old regime came forward to request admission. The aquatic dolphins of Kepler 442b offered their vast ocean worlds as research stations for human marine biology. The crystalline builders of the Magellanic Rim offered to construct whatever monuments or structures humans might desire using their natural abilities to shape silicon and metal. But humans did not accept all applicants immediately. Each species was required to undergo a probationary period during which human observers would evaluate their commitment to the new principles. Democratic governments had to be established and proven functional. Military forces had to be restructured under human command. Educational systems had to be redesigned to teach human values alongside technical knowledge. The probationary process was not cruel, but it was thorough and demanding. Species that had ruled others for centuries found themselves learning to ask permission before making major decisions. Governments that had operated in secret were required to make all their activities transparent to human oversight. Military leaders who had commanded through fear discovered they needed to earn the respect and loyalty of their subordinates. Some species failed the probationary requirements and were denied admission to the cooperative. The Shadowkin were rejected because they refused to abandon their practice of enslaving other species for entertainment. The Devourers were turned away because their biology required them to consume sentient beings to survive. The Purifiers were excluded because their religious beliefs demanded the extinction of all non-believers. These rejected species were not destroyed or punished, but they were isolated completely from the new galactic community. Human forces established quarantine zones around their territories and made it clear that any attempt to expand or interfere with cooperative members would result in immediate intervention. They were free to continue their old ways within their own borders, but they would have no influence on the galaxy beyond those borders. For the species that were accepted into the cooperative, the transformation was profound and rapid. Worlds that had been dying from pollution and neglect were restored to pristine condition within months. Populations that had been devastated by disease and war were healed and made stronger than they had ever been. Technologies that had seemed like magic became everyday tools that improved life for every citizen. The transition was not without challenges. Many aliens struggled to adapt to democratic decision-making after millennia of authoritarian rule. Others found it difficult to accept that their old enemies were now fellow members of the same community. Some resented the loss of their independence even as they enjoyed the benefits of cooperative membership. But the humans had anticipated these difficulties and developed solutions for each problem. Counseling programs helped aliens adjust to new forms of government. Cultural exchange initiatives helped former enemies understand each other better. Educational programs taught aliens why cooperation was more effective than competition for achieving long-term prosperity. The most important change was psychological rather than technological. For the first time in galactic history, every species in the cooperative knew that their survival and prosperity were guaranteed regardless of their military strength or natural resources. The fear that had driven interspecies conflict for millions of years was eliminated, replaced by confidence that there would always be enough for everyone. As the 10th year of the New Order began, the galaxy had become something that would have been unrecognizable to the aliens who had once threatened humanity. War between member species was not just unlikely but impossible due to technological safeguards and cultural changes. Disease and aging were becoming historical curiosities as medical technology advanced beyond all previous limits. Poverty and scarcity were eliminated as matter compilers provided abundance for all. Ambassador Hyunwoo stood once again in a great chamber, but this one was filled with representatives from hundreds of species that had never existed during the old regime. These were the children of the original cooperative members, raised from birth to see cooperation as natural and conflict as absurd. They spoke human languages as fluently as their own and thought in human concepts as easily as their species' traditional patterns. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson in the history of interstellar relations. True power came not from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the wisdom to create friends.